and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. This evening, I wanted to talk about what we feed our newborn and infant babies. In the last 6 years, there's been a lot of new research that has come out that had a huge culture shift in what we've done in terms of introducing foods to infants. And the big question is, how can we prevent food allergies? Because food allergies have been increasing in the US, and the curious question is, can we prevent those, reduce those by what we feed our children? So tonight, specifically, we're going to talk about not all foods, but we're going to talk about what we know about preventing peanut allergy, what we know about preventing celiac disease, which is not an allergy, is an autoimmune disease. And at the end, I'll discuss what the data is currently showing about some other strategies to prevent food allergies. So we'll start with preventing peanut allergies. Now, historically, at least since 2000, pediatricians in the US have recommended avoiding foods that cause food allergies, especially peanuts, until age 3. The thought process being, if these things cause allergy, let's not introduce them, let's not cause allergy in infants and small children. And then as the years went by, in London, there were some doctors that just started noticing things, and they noticed that in their Jewish patients in London, who had family members and everything back in Israel, they noticed that if you looked at Jewish children who grew up in Israel and compared them to Jewish children in London, the children in London were 10 times more likely to have a peanut allergy. That wasn't a study, that was just an observation. And so they said, there's got to be something to this. I wonder why. And one hypothesis among that group of doctors with some knowledge of culture and life in Israel was that maybe it had to do with bamba. So bamba is an infant food, kind of like a puff cereal. It's not exactly a cereal, but it's a puff, and it's a puff food item covered in peanut. And children and infants that are old enough to eat solids in Israel eat this all the time, which is completely different than the wait until you're 3 to introduce peanuts. So then these doctors thought, well, maybe introducing peanuts early, instead of causing food allergy, would prevent food allergy. So at that point, they set up a formalized study. And they set up a famous study called the LEAP study that was published in 2015 that changed a lot of what we do and a lot of what we recommend. So in this study, they included patients who were at high risk of later in life developing peanut allergy. So those would be infants with severe eczema, egg allergy, or both. And they split them into 2 groups. And in the intervention group, they broke tradition at the time, and they introduced peanut products to those infants between 4 and 11 months of age. And they ate peanuts, not peanuts themselves, but peanut-containing products continuously from 4 to 11 months of age. And in the other group, they avoided peanuts, as was the recommendation at the time. And they followed both these groups until the age of 5. And they found an 80% reduction in peanut allergy in the group where peanuts were introduced in infancy, instead of waiting till after 3 or after 5. So that was groundbreaking research that came out in 2015. So much so that the Allergy Institute in the US revised their guidelines about foods for infants and started recommending introducing peanuts to infants. And then the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they agreed with that. They didn't write their own guideline. They just said, we absolutely agree with the allergist new guideline, and we are going to do the same and recommend the same. So not all babies are the same, and not all babies have the same risk of peanut allergy. And so in this new allergy guideline, they broke down the babies into 3 different categories to suggest which babies should start peanuts when. So the first group of children, infants, that we talk about are those at really high risk of developing peanut allergy later in life. So those would be infants with severe eczema, egg allergy, or both of those. And those infants, the recommendation is to introduce peanut-containing products early. And by that we mean 4 to 6 months of life. So the recommendation as far as breastfeeding or formula feeding or introducing solids is to wait until 4 to 6 months of life. And so these children would want to introduce peanut products early within that window. Now, what's really important, and I didn't put on the slide for the sake of too many details, is it's recommended that these children be seen by an allergist and have allergy testing before they start consuming peanuts. So if you think that your baby has an egg allergy, or you think your baby has severe eczema or any amount of eczema, I recommend that you bring that up with your pediatrician at the 4-month well child check to talk about it and talk about what are the next steps. Because if your pediatrician will help you diagnose whether your child does have severe eczema or whether they have mild or moderate eczema or no eczema, whether they have an egg allergy or not. And if your child does fall in that high risk group, then they can refer you in a timely fashion to an allergist for allergy testing. And assuming the allergy testing goes okay, then you could safely introduce peanut products to your child. The second group of infants that they have a recommendation for are those with mild to moderate eczema. And for those children, the recommendation is to introduce peanut-containing products around 6 months of life. Those children don't need allergy testing beforehand. Parents can introduce this in the home. The recommendation is that you do introduce it in the home and not suggest that daycare introduce it where you're not watching or something like that. And then the third group of infants are those who have none of the above, don't have eczema, don't have egg allergy, and those infants aren't at very high risk of developing peanut allergy later in life. So there's no impetus or urgency to introduce peanuts early. So the recommendation is to introduce peanuts approximately around 6 months of life, or in accordance with what your family typically does with your infants and when you typically introduce solids. So it gives more leeway there. And at least even with the well babies who don't have eczema and don't have egg allergy, at least it gives the concept in the back of parents' minds that, unlike your parents' generation, or even back in the 2000s, try not to hold off until they're 3, like we historically said. So that brings up, I think, the big question of how to safely serve peanuts to infants. Because this LEAP study, the intervention was to give these infants 2 grams of peanuts 3 times a week. Now, as a mother, when I read this study, I thought, wow, that is groundbreaking. Everything I learned in medical school is different. we're not waiting until 3 anymore. We're introducing peanuts early. And I got to the end of the study and I thought, how much is 2 grams of peanut protein? Because it's not 2 grams of peanuts, it's 2 grams of peanut protein. So what am I actually supposed to give my infant? Luckily, the Allergy Association subsequently came up with a handout to help parents give ideas of exactly what to feed your infant. One of the key points is that the idea is not just to introduce peanut-containing products at 4 to 6 months of age, depending on your child's situation, and then never introduce them again or have them a couple times a year. The idea in reducing peanut allergy is to introduce it and to give it consistently so that your baby is always tolerant to it. So in the study, for example, they were giving the infants peanut products 3 times a week, and the official recommendation is 2 grams of peanut protein 3 times a week. So, because yes, peanut products, because as we know, peanuts themselves are exactly the size of the child's windpipe, and that's a complete choking hazard until they're 4. So we don't want to actually give them peanuts until they're 4. But as an infant, we have, I'm sure there's lots of options, but the Allergy Association gives 4 practical options for parents. And oh, I apologize. I think the pictures did a mirror image of themselves. So regardless, if we start with the picture on the far right side of the screen. So that's the Bamba product, which is sold everywhere, I'm sure, in Israel. Perhaps you could find it at a boutique grocery store near you. I'm not sure it's completely practical in the US, but the dose would be 21 pieces of Bamba puffs 3 times a week. Another option would be to take peanut butter and thin it out with water. And after this presentation in a follow-up email, we can send you the handout of the recipes of how to mix this. And you would give your child 2 teaspoons of thinned out peanut butter, again, 3 times a week. Another option would be to turn peanut butter into a puree. So to take, and there's a little recipe that to take some peanut butter and mix it with a puree of your choice, and then give your child 2 teaspoons of that. And another option is if you like to buy peanut flour or peanut butter powder, which are very similar content of peanut protein, you can mix that with a puree of your choice, like a fruit puree, a veggie puree, a yogurt, and give that to your child 3 times a week. So that is preventing peanut allergy. Now we're going to switch to an autoimmune disease, celiac disease, which is the disease where people can't tolerate wheat. And in 2020, there were more studies that came out that looked at other food allergies and how can we prevent them. And I want to focus specifically on celiac disease. So first, just as a side note, allergy versus autoimmune disease. Just to clarify that celiac disease is not an allergy. So an allergy, they both have to do with the immune system, but in an allergy, the immune system is inappropriately responding to a foreign antigen, a foreign item, not the person themselves. So responding to pollen, to dust, to cat hair, to dog hair, what have you. And then the immune system is overreacting when it sees that agent and causing temporary symptoms, such as watery eyes, itchy eyes, sneezing, hives, etc. In an autoimmune disease, the immune system is responding and attacking the body itself, the patient's own body. And it's attacking the body as interpreting it as foreign and causing tissue destruction. So if you think of things like childhood diabetes, where the body attacks the pancreas, over time, the pancreas has destruction that accumulates over the years of that patient's life. If you think about celiac disease, which we're talking about today, if that patient is exposed to wheat or gluten in rye or barley, then it can cause damage to the gut and tissue damage to the gut over time. And that is different than an allergy that's not attacking the body. When I have allergies, my immune system is not attacking my eyes. My eyes aren't developing damage that accumulates in my life. They're just responding to the foreign agent, but creating too much symptoms in response. So in 2020, again in England, a group did another study called the EAT study. Every study needs to have an acronym to be popular these days. So this one was called the EAT study. And in this study, they looked at introducing 6 foods to infants, 6 foods that are common food allergies. So they looked at peanut, sesame, egg, milk, and wheat. And I think I'm forgetting one, but my screen was cut off. I'm hoping you can see that. And so in the intervention group, they had these infants start eating these foods, I believe, at 4 months of life. And then in the control group, they avoided all of those foods until 6 months of life. And it was a really big study, and they actually broke it up into a couple different papers. And the paper that I'm focusing on here is the one that addresses the question of wheat. And again, there's a dose of wheat that they gave. So the dose of wheat that they gave was 4 grams of wheat to the infants. And the exact intervention that they did, what they actually gave the patient, was 2 Weetabix cereal biscuits in the course of a week. So Weetabix cereal biscuits are a popular cereal choice in England. This is what they look like in the picture. It actually doesn't, to me, look like a cereal that you shake out of a box. It's these really hard biscuits, and you usually take one, or for an infant or a child probably, and mix it with some milk, and then it gets really mushy really quick, and then the infant can eat it, or the child or the toddler. And so they were giving, over the course of a week, 2 bowls of Weetabix. And they followed these infants until the age of 3. And they found that in the children who were not exposed to wheat and consistently doing this Weetabix regimen, the prevalence of celiac disease was 1.4%. And which doesn't sound like a lot, but they had a huge sample population. And then in the intervention group, in the children where they gave them consistently Weetabix week after week after week, 0 of those patients had celiac disease at the age of 3. And then, which was significant, with a p-value of 0.02. So again, similarly, showing that the earlier you introduce wheat into the baby's diet, the more likely you are to prevent this autoimmune disease of celiac disease. Now, for the sake of the evening and the sake of time, I won't go into all of the other 6 food groups, but I do want to say, especially I found this reassuring as a mother, was that when they looked at their whole study together of all 6 food groups that they looked at, the codfish, the milk, the sesame seeds, the peanuts, the eggs, the wheat, so the children were supposed to eat all 6 of these items multiple times a week for years. And when they did the analysis, they found that there was no significant difference between the group that was intending to eat all 6 of these things and the group that was intending to avoid all of these things. But then But there was really low compliance among the patients and the parents, because practically it was really challenging to get in a week after week after week, all of these 6 things multiple times a week. It just adds up to a lot. And so a lot of the patients and parents in the study group weren't able to be even successful with the protocol, and that affects their results to show no significant difference. When they broke their analysis down and only looked at patients who were able to strictly follow the protocol, then they started to see differences and improvement and reduction in food allergy. So I think that's hopeful in the sense that, again, suggesting that the earlier you introduce things, the more likely you are to prevent food allergy. But I think it's also helpful to realize as a parent, you can't do it all. You can't introduce all of the foods that are possibly going to cause food allergy for your child. Yeah, it's okay to just do the best that you can. And then lastly, I just want to talk about a couple other strategies that people have thought about and hypothesized about that may or may not prevent food allergy. And I would like to say, before we get to the next screen, that all of these next items, the thought process is there, but the data hasn't panned out. So at this point in 2021, the data does not show that any of these ideas, any of these strategies below prevents food allergies. So people think maybe if I avoid certain foods while breastfeeding, then my baby won't have food allergy to that food later in life. And so far the data hasn't shown that there's any benefit to that, or eating certain foods while breastfeeding and exposing the breast milk to that will, I've got to eat these things to reduce food allergy in my baby. And that hasn't panned out in studies as of yet either. So I absolutely want everyone to get rid of that mommy guilt of maybe if I had done that, maybe if I hadn't done that. There's no reason to be worrying about preventing food allergies with your diet while you're breastfeeding. Also, breastfeeding is amazing. Breastfeeding is good for your body. Breastfeeding is challenging and it's not for everyone. But breastfeeding beyond, we recommend breastfeeding, at least 6 months if you can get to a year, but there's no benefit to breastfeeding beyond the first 3 months not overall, but in terms of reducing food allergy. And then, like I said, the recommendation is to introduce solids around 4 to 6 months of age, and delaying that and saying, well, maybe if I delay until 8 months or 10 months or 12 months, then I can reduce food allergy. Then that hasn't panned out either. So all of that, so that's what I wanted to share tonight. And I also wanted to clarify that all of these studies show that a reduction in the prevalence of peanut allergy or celiac disease, what have you. But every child is different. So none of this is a guarantee that your infant can't possibly get a peanut allergy if you try the method of introducing peanuts early and often, or introducing wheat early and often. So I want to throw that out there. And then I think this is also a good opportunity to discuss when you're introducing solids to the baby in that 4 to 6 month range. Every baby is different, and one of the things that you want to consider is the baby ready to eat? So can they not sit on their own, but can they sit up enough in the chair to eat? Do they have, are they interested in food, etc. So thank you very much for joining this evening.